So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let me start this. Let me notify everybody. Class has begun. Alright. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. رضي الله تعالى عنه وسدد التابعين وعلماء عاملين وآئمة أربع المجتهدين ومقالديهم إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Alright, so okay. So what I got written here for those who are on the Zoom, I want to explain the actual writing, right, of what I wrote on the board here. Okay, so what I'm mentioning here is because of the nature of this book. This book Miratul Tulab, it's a bit more advanced than Umdatul Bayan. You know, my recommendation was for, this class was for most people who've completed Umdatul Bayan. You know, there's a lot of issues, and inshallah, hopefully it will clarify a lot of the confusion and misunderstanding. A lot of people have a misunderstanding and an overload of information, and so there's terms that's thrown out, right? Like you'll have the term of Salaf thrown out, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about what is intended behind that. You have the term madhab thrown out, and there's misunderstanding of what a madhab is. You have the term aqidah thrown out, and there's a misunderstanding. Or even the term ashri thrown out, and there's a misunderstanding of what that's about. There's a term of maturidi thrown out, and most people have a misunderstanding. A lot of this information that was thrown out today, there's a thing that's known as whoever's the victor, they control the narrative. Okay? Whoever's victorious controls the narrative. And a lot of times you'll find that there's two different histories. You have the histories that's in the book, and then you have the history that's actually on the ground in this reality. So, example, not in all United States textbooks that people are using, but in some states, the textbooks that are being used in school, we're talking about, is that African American, the indigenous black people that's in America, they migrated to America to come work. All right? Yeah, it's in the textbooks. No BS. It's the narrative they're given. Because the victor, the person who's the champion, controls the narrative. And so what the reality we know is that the transatlantic slave trade that every European country was involved in, right? We know that is documents, the hidden information now that they're hiding and things of that nature. There's a lot of people writing, like a lot of professors, college professors in the United States are writing about slave revolts in America. Most people believe there was never no slave revolts in America, but that's a whole nother discussion. I just use that as an example. A lot of these terms were introduced, and the people who were narrating about these terms gave a different understanding. Like most people, it became commonly understood about Ashari, okay, Imam Ashari. And so that I give you from my perspective. The very first time I ever heard of Imam Ashari, I read a book written by a contemporary Yasser Qadi. And in this book, he narrates about Imam Ashari on how one time at one point of his life, his father raised him up. His stepfather, raised him in the Mu'tazila understanding of Islam, which is true. Now, along with that narrative, a lot of stories were told about Imam Ashari, saying he only believed in 7 attributes and all this other stuff, which is a lie. These beliefs were attributed to the Mu'tazila understanding. Now, if you blame Imam Ashari and try to label him as a bad guy because he was one time at one point in his life a Mu'tazila, and he later left that understanding, he later, left that belief, and he established what is known as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He's considered a Mujaddid. The Aqidah, the belief of Ahl Sunnah. And he refuted the Mu'tazila belief along with other beliefs as well. Okay? Now, there's a lot to this. Okay? I'm trying to be brief as possible. I don't want to, overburden anyone. Plus, it's still early in the morning. People are still shaking their cobwebs, So Imam Ashari, he established the principles, and later those principles, which we're going to talk about, madhahibs, they're established based off of a set of principles. All right, that's what madhabs are understood. No founder or the label leader of the madhab has ever said, I'm going to establish a madhab and everybody's to follow me. The only thing that they were doing was teaching what was given to them and establish these points and principles. Now, this is where it's going to be very important for you to understand who the Salaf is. Can you pass me that green pouch right there for me, please? Where you're going to understand the part and the role that the Salaf play. Okay? You got to understand the role that the Salaf play in all of this. All of your knowledge has to be connected back to the Salaf. And even that term has been misused and abused. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So, anyway, Imam Ashari established principles and refuted the ideas of the Mu'tazila. And the Mu'tazila was a fitna. It was a fitna before Imam Ashari. Right? And there were scholars of Ahl Sunnah who, refuted some of their beliefs and concepts. Ahmed ibn Hanbal, he was one who also encountered Mu'tazila. And if I'm not mistaken, him and Imam Ashari were contemporaries. Also, another thing is that plays factors in establishments of madhahibs. There was no rival madhab in the region where the people went to study from that particular scholar. All right. Now, this has always been known, even during the time of the Khalifa and the grandson of Umar ibn Khattab, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. At one point, because so many people were fabricating hadith, you can only go to certain areas to learn from certain scholars hadith. All right. That's what the Khalifa, he restricted it. Like, no, listen, there's many liars in this place, many liars in that place. You can only take knowledge from these particular scholars, hadith from these particular scholars. Then, the versification or the authentication of hadith and so on and so forth developed and derived. It really was derived from back during the time of the Sahaba. This is where the whole isnad comes from. And this is where I put this term here, right? I'm going to put a highlighter right here where I'm highlighting for those of you who are on Zoom. As-sanidu al-ilm, right? The chains of knowledge, right? As-sanid al-ilm. I should have put as-sanid al-ulum, right? The chains of sciences, okay? And this is very important. So you have this term, which we also threw out here, the term salaf, right? Play a major part in our chain. Okay. Now, what I want to focus on is just that category. We're starting from the salaf. Okay. So you have the Sahaba. Okay. Now, firstly, this is established based off of the words of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith of Mu'akhir, one of the latter hadiths, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Khayru qurni, the best of generation is my generation. Thumma ladina yalunahum, thumma ladina yalunahum, and then those that come after them, and then those that come after them." Okay, I mentioned that the best of generation, right, are those who follow me, meaning the Sahaba. Thumma ladina yalunahum, and then those that come after them. Thumma ladina yalunahum, and then those that come after them. Right? Now, Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, Taqaddam Allah bi rahmati ameen, he has an excellent chapter that's elaborating on that hadith in his Ihya Sunnah wa Ikhmal Bid'ah, and he also has a shorter version of it in the book called Wathiqatu Ikhwan. All right, those two books. If you want to get a good, in-depth understanding of what we're discussing, I make reference to those two books. Maybe inshallah in the Google Classrooms I'll post it, post the notes from that. Maybe I'll make a Word document out of it and post the read for you guys to read, for the students to read, to give them more in-depth knowledge. Because the purpose of studying is not to collect a whole bunch of ijazah. See, the ijazah game, it's a hustle amongst Westerners. And I'm not saying that it's not a hustle amongst people overseas either, because it's a hustle. I can just only speak with what we're dealing with. I can't be concerned with the entire world. It's a hustle with Westerners. You'll find many students or many scholars or many imams will use the ijazah as a method. It's a method of verification. First of all, let's start with that. It's a method of verification that you may have studied a particular text. It's like a certificate, to some degree. It's being abused because most people, they're teaching you, and then when you start to get fahim, you get understanding of a thing, then they tell you, well, you don't have no ijazah. A lot of people base whether or not they will take knowledge from you or even take your knowledge serious based on the fact of whether you got ijazah or not, right? So what's more important is fahim, having understanding, because a lot of the confusion that we're having now with all these terms that are written here on the board is based off of the fact of those who have ijazah but don't have understanding, right? And so they don't connect the dots. So what we're supposed to do as, students of the Minhaj of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, he was a mujaddid, right? He was a reviver, a person of tajdeed who revived the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was also a reviver of the ulum sharia, the sciences of the deen as well in his region, right? And as a result of that, Allah favored him and blessed him with the same thing that he blessed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with, and that was absolute disconnection with those who disbelieve. So the Sahaba is at the top of the food chain, right? Because they directly learned from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you're speaking to someone who learned directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how much doubt would you have in what they're telling you? None, right? You won't have too much doubt. There'd be no doubt there about what they're saying, all right? Second is the Tabi, okay? This group right here. They are the students of the Sahaba. Okay? So when they say, I learned this directly from Ibn Abbas, their contemporaries or their students, how much would they disbelieve what they're saying? They would be like, yo, okay, khalas. Okay, alhamdulillah. And you read this, and this is what you read in books. When you get to the era of the tabi'i, the followers of the followers of the followers of the Sahaba, because that's what tabi'i mean, right? They are the ones who learn from the tabi'i. So in their circle, who would doubt that they learned this from the tabi'i? Everyone would accept it. So therefore, if it's accepted that they learned this from the tabi'i, and they say that they learned it from the Sahaba, the one who is the tabi'i, he's not going to have any doubt. After that is the rest of the ummah. We're restricted to those 3 generations, and it doesn't have to be all of the people. That chain, it just comes from one of the people of veracity that was narrated to the next person and to the next person, because seeking knowledge is it's an amana. In the first class of Miratul Tulab, where we talked about, that people have to know their limits, and we talked about the 3 type of people, right? And that's why I asked the students as homework to write an outline, right? So I know that you got understanding of this. 3 types of people. What are the 3 types of people? You have the ulama, those people that are learning. You have the mutawassit, right? That's the person that's between the ulama and the common people, right? And then you have the ammah, right? The amiyah, the common people in general, right? Each group is connected to knowledge of some sort. It's not that, see how most people use common people, the term common people or laymen today, is to throw them in a category, the category of timeout. It's like, shut up. You have no right talking about this. Now, the only time you pull the shut up and put them in the, the penalty box is when they start talking about knowledge outside of their things that are outside of their scope, right? That's when you put them in the timeout box. Like, all right, that's beyond your scope. Okay, you need to slow down. When they have a question with regards to deen, they're supposed to follow the ayat in the Quran, where Allah instructed us. فَأَسْلُ أَهْلِ ذِكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of the reminder if you don't know. And we talked about the criteria of the people of the reminder. Ahl dhikr is just as Sheikh Uthman Danfodio said, Taqaddam bi rahmati Ameen. He said that there's 2 things that Ahl dhikr have, is sound knowledge and taqwa. Never take your knowledge from somebody whose knowledge isn't sound. Never take your knowledge from someone who doesn't display taqwa. Right? That's established. Further elaboration on these characteristics will come later on down the line when we study other books of the Shaykh. Now, let's talk about the criteria of the Salaf. Okay? The criteria of the Salaf is, I have marked here, all right, on the side. Let me change the color of this. I'm going to change it to yellow. Mellow yellow. All right, so the criteria is right here on the side. Okay? What is the criteria? The criteria is that they either learn from directly someone within these categories, or they at least met them once, met one of the following, meaning of the 3 categories, okay? So, meaning that you are a Sahaba because you met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And follow, of course, you had to be a follower and learn, right? This is a Sahaba. He was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Now every companion in their own right is knowledgeable, but you have some amongst them who are more knowledgeable because either they spent more time with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or they excelled in learning. Okay, and there's some Sahabas that narrate, and this is more so in the Hadith methodology discussion, Hadith. But there are some Sahaba who learn Hadith directly from other Sahaba who were present with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so that doesn't take away from their rank, but there are some that are more knowledgeable in some areas versus others. One Sahaba was named the Alimul Halal wa Haram. What was his name?
Ali.
Mu'adh bin Jabal. Ali was known as the Bab al-Ilm, right? The door to knowledge in the narration. The Prophet ﷺ called him that. Mu'adh bin Jabal, he was known as the most knowledgeable of the halal and haram. Now, Mu'adh bin Jabal, he would go and learn from the Prophet ﷺ and go back to Yemen. But Mu'adh bin Jabal was from Medina. He would go learn things and go back to his people and teach. So there's also an indication for us, especially as students and teachers, that we are to establish teaching methodology. And it is known from the Prophet ﷺ that when we give dawah, how do we give dawah? The Prophet ﷺ, when he dispatched Mu'adh bin Jabal to Yemen, to the people in Yemen, he said, when you teach the people, you teach them about La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, then you teach them about Salah, then you teach them about fasting, teach them about Zakat, teach them about Hajj. So as just a caller, a da'i, I use that term, a caller to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, is that you're teaching the people their far'ain. You teach them their belief and you teach them their mu'amilat, their belief and then their action, their behavior, what they're supposed to act on. Okay? Now, these Sahaba, right, they learned from the Prophet ﷺ, and they were so concerned about preserving what the Prophet ﷺ taught that they wrote things down, they memorized them, and they begin to spread them amongst their people, begin to spread them. This is what is be known as hadith. And they begin to teach, right? Hadith, you have tafsir, right? This is where these sciences came from, fiqh, right? Each one is categorized under a category and they teach, okay? These Sahaba, they were so concerned about preserving Islam, which we should be on the same path, that they taught. They didn't try to confuse people. Their main goal was just to make sure people worship Allah Ta'ala by following the sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So these people who sat and learned under them, they're known as the tabi, the followers, right? Who learned from the Sahaba, okay? And from the tabi, they did the same thing. They were concerned. They preserved the words of the Sahaba, which was preserving the words of the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, preserving the tafsir, the understanding of the Quran and everything, and it was connected back to them. They preserved that. And they begin to gain students. That is known as the tabi, right? And with Allah Ta'ala's wisdom, by words of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you'll see that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam cut it off after 3 generations. That is sufficient for us, right? So, and this is why the Shaykh, he mentions in the Ihya Sunnah, whoever follows their fiqh, meaning from one of these 3 generations, is sufficient. All doors are closed. There's no more to be done in anything that's derived rulings, contemporary, like in our time, are only derived based off of the old rulings. Okay? I don't even like using the term old rulings, but we're referring back to those first 3 generations. So fiqh isn't just something where somebody just sits back and ponders, right? And say, I don't like that. I'm going to change this. Usually when you find, or any of the madhahibs, usually when you find there's differences, right? The word is ikhtilaf. Usually when you find that there is differences, what you find about the differences is that it's usually 9 times out of 10, like as the Shaykh who explains in a book called Fatul Basair, that is based off of some sort of evidences, right? Whether they're understanding, they're fahim, they're making that ijtihad, putting in their ijtihad in order to establish their istinbat, right? Their effort in order to establish the extracted ruling based off of the principles or whatever proofs. And sometimes he said that when a scholar does this, he says sometimes their ijtihad is just the same way as a narration, meaning the same way that they would get a narration, that you would get it directly from the tabi'i who got it from the tabi. I'm sorry, you get it from a tabi who got it from a tabi who got it from a sahaba who got it directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says sometimes that they miss the mark, right? They're not infallible. So sometimes they may miss the mark. And so if brought amongst other mujtahids with their dalil, and this is why the Shehu in the Ihya, he says that if a person is following a sheikh in a thing that has been refuted or repealed, right? In that, there's nothing wrong with you guiding that person, but you can't guide them by the theory of the mujtahid. You have to guide them by the evidences. Of course, this isn't a statement for the Ammiyah. This is why it's important for everybody to know their category, right? This isn't a statement generally for the Ammiyah, for the general population. Because later on he says in there, he quotes Imam Ghazali, right? Where he said in the Ihya Sunnah, he quotes Imam Ghazali. He said that the general Muslim should be concerned with those things that concern him and leave the knowledge to those the people, leave knowledge to those who are learned. And with the Shehu, he clarified. He said, I say, what is intended here is that the person, the common person is concerned with learning their Fardul Ain, learning Tajweed of the Quran, memorizing some of the hadith and things like that. But those things that are more in depth, those are for those people that are learning to establish rulings and things of that nature on that topic. So everybody has a place to play. And what the Shehu also said, he said this in Miratul Tulab in last week's lesson. He said that whoever exceeds that limit, exceeds that boundary, he is trifling and he's making mockery of Allah Ta'ala's deen, right? And we've had this problem. This has been a big problem in our time period, that people are exceeding their boundaries and they're making mockery of Allah's deen and confusing people more than what they actually are. Okay, so boom. Okay, we're done discussing the Dawratul Salaf, right? The era of the Salaf. Let's talk about let's go all the way over to the right. Let me remove this from here. Let's move all of this. I'm taking all this away, okay? For all of you who are on Zoom. All right. I'm gonna change the color a little bit. We're gonna go to light blue. Okay, so now let's look all the way over to, I guess it'll be on our right, on both sides, on you guys' side and also in the masjid here. Okay, we wrote on this. All right, let's discuss this over here. Okay. Hold on a second. Let me put my highlighter on again. Matter of fact, let me try something different. This is fancy over here. I'm trying to learn how to use this stuff. It ain't working for me. So anyway, let me go back. All right, now. No, not that far back. Okay, let's put it back on the marker here. I mean, a highlighter. All right, so we have over here, we have this one, and we have this over here, right? Aqidah and fiqh, okay? I didn't put tasawwuf, but that will be what is known as ilm sir or ihsan, right? And there are some behaviors that you learn through fiqh, but tasawwuf in itself is the science that is pertaining to the heart, and you'll deal with that. In this book, Miratul Tulab, Miratul Tulab, he doesn't talk about tasawwuf in here. Okay, so this is why this is kind of left out. He actually he touches on it. He touches on it. He touches on it definitely. But anyway, not in depth like Umdatul Bayan. Okay. Now, if you go down, I want to highlight this one word. Okay. Fard. Something that is an obligation. Now, what does this really mean to you? What does that mean to us, the followers? Something that is fard, it is meaning indefinite, definite or definity, that it is an obligation incumbent upon you, and if you don't do it, then it becomes a sin. If you do it, you receive reward. Right? So something that's fard, you're sinful for it. And this meaning is interchangeable how it applies, because in Umdatul Bayan, you're going to see the word fard, or you're going to see its plural, faraid. Okay? And that's going to carry a different definition. All right? Right now, fard here is carrying that definition that if you do it, you'll be rewarded for it. If you don't do it, it's considered a sin. In Umdatul Bayan, fard is going to carry the understanding or the meaning that, okay, they said I got 10 more minutes for you guys that are on Zoom. If it cuts off, just log back in with that same number that's up top, the same ID number. All right, I'll just restart the board. But anyway, fard in Umdatul Bayan is valid or invalid. Okay, if you leave it, salat is invalid, or whatever the practice is invalid. Okay, now when you're talking about fard, we're going back to this word fard, right? You have Ainiya and Kifaya. Ainiya and Kifaya. Ainiya meaning the individual obligation, and meaning that every person is responsible for practicing and knowing this particular knowledge. Kifaya is there's either a group of people that knows this particular knowledge, or maybe an individual, is depending on how big and small the community is. If this person or peoples or persons, right, knows this knowledge, it relieves the burden off of the rest of the community. So everybody won't be sinful. All right? Ainiya, if you do it, you be rewarded, or you have knowledge of it, and you practice it, you get reward for it. If you leave it, it's considered sinful. If you deny something that is fard, it's kufr. Right? The thing of kifaya, I categorized them in each subject of Aqidah and Fiqh. Okay? So now let's turn to the board. I'm going to highlight what we're discussing. So in terms of Ainiya, right, with regards to Aqidah, it is Usuluddin, right, where you go over the Ilahiyat, the divinity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we talked about those things that are wajib, what are necessary for you to know about Allah, those things that are mustahil, those things that are impossible with Allah ta'ala, those things that are jaiz to believe about Allah ta'ala. The science of Tawheed is just as the Shaykh who mentions in Umdatul Bayan, that you have to know enough of it in order to tasihhahu, right? In order to make your belief sound. You have to know the science enough to make your belief sound, and understand why we keep making reference to Umdatul Bayan. Umdatul Bayan is the the knowledge that is necessary for you to know. All right? You have to know this particular knowledge. So the Ilahiyat, it consists of three things within there. The Ilahiyat, the belief with regards to Allah Ta'ala. and the belief with regards to the Nabawiya or Nubuwa, to the prophets, right? And they have judgments, legal judgments within those sciences. The legal judgments is something that is wajib, that's necessary for a person to know. Mustahil, something that is impossible to believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those things that are impossible to believe about the messengers, right? You want to know about those things, make reference back to Umdatul Bayan class, because we discussed those. And then the third, and then you have those things that are jaiz, permissible to believe about Allah and about the prophets, right? The third category that makes up of Usuluddin is called the Sami'at. Those things that are heard, that are narrated from the prophets and from Allah Ta'ala, that you know about the afterlife. Okay? So this is what Usuluddin is about. And we're going to cover Usuluddin also in this particular book, but it will be a little more focused and centered around the evidences and proofs. Okay? Now, the kifaya of Aqidah is what is known as Ilmul Kalam. Okay? Ilmul Kalam, the science of theology. This is where one gets into it, and the Shaykh will explain it in the next chapter that we'll go over next week, right? Today I wanted to give this muqaddimah, like this introductory lecture with regards to the book, so that we'll understand and know what we're approaching with this particular book. With the Kifaya, and this is also why I recorded it on YouTube for you guys to normally you gotta check, those who are committed students to the class, you have to constantly check the Google Classrooms. That's our classroom where we'll post the recordings and things like this. In this particular lecture series, or this particular book, I don't want to generalize it all to the public. So that's why this one, the first class, it was actually a private recording. And this one, I put this on YouTube, which I may put them all on YouTube, but I may set it to private, and it'll only be in our class for Google Classrooms. So anyway, the Kifaya is dealing with Ilmul Kalam. Okay? Meaning that everyone doesn't have to know it, but people have to know it. And Ilmul Kalam is the defense of the deen. Right? When someone, Ilmul Kalam deals with some of the issues, argumentation about, istiwa, right? What is its meaning? Does it mean that Allah is literally sitting, right? Or, is he in a direction? Which also could be argued from Usuluddin as well, and like I said, you make reference back for Umdatul Bayan. But it goes into some of those discussions, whether Iman increases or decreases, right? These are discussions of Ilmul Kalam, okay? And, they get more in detail, all right? Let's move over to the subject of fiqh. Okay?
For Kifaya.
Huh?
I said for Kifaya.
Kifaya. Fiqh also has the same thing as well. It goes under the category of fard. Okay? That's why I put this little thing here to indicate that, it's part of fard, right? And under that category, you have the Ainiyah, which is fiqh ibadah. Okay? Every person has to know and is obligated to know about certain things. Now, there's certain principles with regards to fiqh, and one of them is that it doesn't become an obligation upon you to learn a thing until it's obligatory for you to practice that thing. So there's some things with fiqh ibadah that you'll learn generally. when you're sitting in a setting in a classroom. But some of these actions may not be obligatory upon you. Okay? An example I'll give you. Like a lot of people, we like to, as Americans, we like to popularize things. We're part of a pop culture, right? People of knowledge, they know their thing. Like if you're a skilled person, right? Let's say like you're a weapons expert. You can lay down a whole cache of weapons in front of a person. They'll take every weapon out and they can tell you about this weapon, you know, the velocity, how the bullet travels, you know, at how many yards it can reach, you know, where it hit its target, and so on and so forth, right? Likewise, the same thing with us in our books, right? Our learning is primarily through the madhab of Imam Malik by means of Sheikh Uthman Fodio, right? So therefore, we need to understand our books, right? Because our books is our arsenal as students. Okay, you need to know your arsenal. So you have books that are popularly known, such as Al-Akhdari. If you skim through the entire Akhdari, you'll see the only thing Akhdari deals with is basis of Aqidah, basis of Adab, and Salat, Khalas. Right? So most people are running around, and because most people are ignorant of the Sharia and fiqh, you'll look like a mufti after you study the Akhdari, right? But that's not the ending of the affair. You could take the Akhdari is a good book, you know, you can take and teach a new Muslim or children, right? Or somebody that's just beginning in fiqh. There's no problem with that. From our ulama, meaning from the Fudiyya, right? We had studied a second book after we studied the Akhdari with some of my students, was we studied Sulam al-Huda, right? That series I got recorded on SoundCloud, right? We went over that. That book, that entire book was pertaining to Salat, right? Not Tahara, but just Salat, the Ahkam al-Salat, right? Excellent book to follow up behind a person who only studied the Akhdari, or even has a basic entry understanding or studied Umdatul Bayan. Is excellent for that, because it goes a bit more in depth than most of the books that we got on fiqh, you know, with regards to Salah, right? Excellent book. Second book that's written for fiqh ibadah is called Al-Ashmawiyya, right? A lot of people don't study it. Some people do study it. It's famous and it's not famous, right? Al-Ashmawiyya. What does Ashmawiyya deal with? Tahara and Saum, fasting. Tahara, Salat, and Saum, fasting, right? Everything pertaining to Salat, everything pertaining to fasting, right? This is usually a book. Most people, they study this book, they feel like they the mufti. They ready to open a masjid now. Right? Start giving rulings, right? Another book after that, Umdatul Bayan, covers Salat, Zakat, fasting, all of that, right? It's the equivalent of Umdatul Bayan is Ibn Ashir's Murshad al-Mu'in.
Sorry.
Okay? Murshad al-Mu'in. That's the next book. Hold on 1 second. I think the class. Yeah, I think the class ended. Hold up. I'm talking about the Zoom class now. Okay. That's IG. And don't worry, we almost done anyway. I'm not gonna go into the book because of Okay, so where we left off at, we were talking about Murshad al-Mu'in. Okay, the book by Ibn Ashir. Okay, it's written as a didactic poem, a poem that's teaching, a teaching poem that you memorize. My recommendation is get the book, begin to memorize it. There's some things in there that's not in Umdatul Bayan. There's some things, he mentions a few things with regards to the ahkam, khamsa. He talks about that in there, and so on and so forth, right? Not saying that the Sheikh was negligent of it, because it's covered in other books. But why I say it's a good book, because it's written as a didactic poem, right? It's a book that you can memorize the Farda Ain in a poem, in a nazm, in a poetic method. My recommendation is, if you got poetry skills in English, if you could write the Farda Ain in a way where you can memorize it. Take up poetry. Poetry is like mastery of language anyway, but it's written in that manner. And this book covers more than the other two books that we mentioned. I'm referring to Al-Akhdari and Ashmawiyah, right? This book is similar to Umdatul Bayan, and it covers all of this in this poetic nazm. Umdatul Bayan covers as pretty much the same information. There's some things that's not mentioned in it. This is why I recommend that you study and memorize this particular book after studying Umdatul Bayan, right? As a student, it's very helpful and resourceful. It'll help you in your studies, especially of the Maliki Madhab, and it gives you a more overall. It fine tunes things for you. It paints a broader picture for you. So ilm fiqh, okay? In the science of fiqh, you have the ayniyah, the individual obligation, and the subject of that, the category of that is called fiqh al-ibadah, all right? In the kifaya, right? Remember, the ayniyah is what you're individually obligated to learn. In the kifaya, you have certain subjects that is not incumbent upon everybody to know, but a group of people, a person or persons from the Jama'ah has to know it. And they also have to teach it as well to make sure that the legacy continues. Because one of if you go by the six, what Islam came, the six universals, it came to the first thing that's important is to preserve the deen. And the only way to preserve the deen is by learning it, living it, and teaching it. Right? If you don't learn it, you don't live it, you don't teach it, it dies. Okay? It dies with the person. This is how we got the compilation of the Quran. Many of the Hufaz, which is plural for the memorizers of Hafid, they were murdered. Not murdered, but they were slain in some of the jihads, the ghazwa and the wars, and that was the Quran. So with them, when you memorize the entire Quran, when you memorize the entire Mudawwana, when you memorize the entire, whatever book, memorize the knowledge that you and understanding that you have, when you die, it dies with you. And as an obligation upon you as an individual, you have to ensure, you have to teach it to other people to make sure that they pass it down. This is in a manner, this is what Senate is for, in order to preserve and verify that you learn this from somebody, right? So you have the kifaya, you have things like janazah, okay? Everybody doesn't have to know how to do the janazah prayer. However, there has to be people in the community that is able to teach people their janazah, teach people how to do a janazah, how to perform it, washing and shrouding the body and everything that's connected to janazah. And you have to know its rulings. It's ahkam. It's rulings. You just can't do a thing without knowing the rules. There's rules. What makes it valid? What makes it invalid? Right? What's sunnah? What's bid'ah? Right? We want to be careful of those things. This is also another term that people smeared. You have to know about what's bid'ah because you have to make sure that your actions is on the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Another one, jihad. A lot of people are walking away from that because they feel that they're either going to go to jail or end up in Guantanamo Bay or the government's going to assassinate them and all of these things. This is how you know you're far away from the methodology of the Salaf, right? You don't fear the fear of the blamer, like Allah says in the Quran. Those who love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't fear anything. They don't fear anything except this displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have more fear of something in creation versus in which it causes you not to practice, then therefore you have fear of those people in creation, right? So, but what's another category? The second category, jihad, right? You have to know its ahkam. You have to know the rulings to jihad. What's permissible, what's impermissible, what's sunnah, what's bid'ah, right? Good book, a good book with that. Inshallah, I plan on doing what they call a maqara, right? Like a reading of it is Sawq Ummah, right? That the Sheikh wrote, where it's 220 or 216 hadith from Bukhari and Muslim that discusses the Fard Ain, and he ends the chapter with Babul Jihad, right? These are things that have to be taught. You can't act like if you're scared and you don't, and I'm not saying promote it like, yeah, we're gonna run around everybody, we need to do jihad. No, it's part of our deen. The same way you learn the rulings of salah is the same way you need to know about jihad. Otherwise, if you don't know, then you open the door for people to join in ISIS and Al Qaeda and the CIA and FBI, and all those other groups that claim to be jihadists, right? You open that door for that. They can lie and start putting in rules. The reason why people were so ignorant, there was a time that people advocated jihad, but most people are ignorant of it, right? One of the biggest downfalls, if you really you're destroying the Sharia, all you have to do is remove the knowledge. One of the biggest downfalls within the Muslim Ummah now, they're not functioning. I make a distinction. There's a difference between a mosque and a masjid. A masjid is something that's more connected to the Prophet ﷺ. Today's mosque, they're incorporated, they're 501c3, right? They're more concerned about those type of things. Most mosques don't have an imam. They just have the building, right? And they have the maintenance. So they make sure that the lights are on. They make sure that it's clean. They make sure it's that. They hire and fire the imam. Like the one imam that was down in Texas, he spoke out about one of their board members that was molesting a child. They fired him, right? That's a mosque. That's not a masjid. And then you have a jama'ah, right? The jama'ah has leadership. Leadership establishes the masjid. Leadership makes sure that the masjid is maintained. People come to the congregation, they have bay'ah, they have commitment with their leader, right? And they pray in their masjid, right? But because of all these things are now tainted, you don't have a jama'ah. You have very few people that's connected to jama'ah that have leadership. And so now most people are learning their Islam from television, from media, and they're following whatever's popular, right? ISIS and Al Qaeda is just like following Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, right? Why is that? Because they're popular. You wouldn't know about them if they turn the TV off, if they cut the internet off, you wouldn't know nothing about them. You would be word of mouth. You would be concerned about what's in front of you, right? Most people aren't concerned with what's in front of them. You're worried about everything that's going on over there, crying about how bad society is, but you're not putting in any effort to change anything, right? Oh, we got crack in our society. A lot of Muslims that go to the masjid were former crackheads or crack dealers. They either used it or they sold it, right? Islam changed you. Why you can't tell the rest of the crack dealers to stop, right? Oh, you gangbangers. We got gangs here. Well, at one point in time, the people in the masjid, they're gangbangers too. Right? The Sahabas used to drink date wine. They used to gang bang. We do ride-bys in cars. They did camel bys. They roll by on a camel, knock your head clean off. They rapped about it too. Yeah, I killed such and such. They did it too in Arabic. That's the only difference, right? If Islam changed them, then it can change us. Now back to our class, right? The kifayah. So jihad is one of those subjects under there. The hudud, the punitive punishments, right? Those are things that are studied, right? Under those things. Nafaqah, right? Maintenance in marriage, right? Which everybody seems to think that they're scholars of, okay? Most people, I was having a conversation with someone last night. Most people don't know what wealth is, right? The average black person, what do you think wealth is? A couple dollars, right? They don't even know what wealth is, So when you get into that, and you start talking about subject, people get perplexed when you start talking about riba, right? And when you talk about riba on a basic common level, most people think about loans and interest. Riba is in your pocket with presidents' faces on it. That dollar. Most people don't know about that. So they're ignorant of those things, right? So there's certain things that you have to learn, in order to preserve the deen. But one of the biggest things that we're facing, biggest dilemma is we live amongst the kuffar, and we live so much so we begin to blend in, just like Qadi Mudi Abdul, he said when the British were raiding into Sokoto, when they were colonizing it. And the subject, the decision, the discussion was look, and this is how important Islam is. You have to know your history. Islam is so important that when the Europeans arrived in Nigeria, the scholars they met, they said, man, look, what are you going to do? So Qadi Mudi Abdul, who was the Qadi at the time, he gave a fatwa. He wrote a whole fatwa on this. He said, we only have really 3 or 4 choices to deal with the kuffar. The first one is we could fight them. But they didn't have the ability to fight them. If they fought them, they probably would have been slaughtered. You know, they didn't have enough weaponry. You know, things were disorganized. So they said, okay, we can't do that. Maybe we can make a sulhi with them, a truce, a treaty. Something similar to Treaty of Hudaybiyah. You know why he said we shouldn't do that? He said because our women and children will fall in love with their customs and practices. Customs and practices. In every single argument that you find now in America is based off of the fact that we're in love with the way of the kuffar and we want to make Islam fit that particular way. That's the reality of today. Can my wife wear a wig? Can my wife, you know, dress up like a French hoe? Is it permissible for her to dress like a French hoe? That is a love of the kuffar, right? We have our ways of intercourse, khalas. Then people will give room. Well, I don't see anything wrong with it, you know, so on and so forth. And then some women, they fall in love with it. You know, when they read these magazines, you know, every woman desires to be the next top model. And then what does she do? She take a bunch of flicks. Click, 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 click. And then some of those flicks start ending up on Facebook, especially when y'all get divorced or y'all going through something. We love the way of the kuffar. Most Muslims don't even get married the way Muslims get married. The Muslim way of getting married is wali. You know, most people know each other because they're in the same community. Usually marry amongst yourselves, right? Wali, family, meet with them, right? You can court them, meaning you might go over the house, the family invites you over to eat. You sit there and you wrap it up. You dropping your bars on the sister right in front of the family. You know, she like, oh man, I love him, Abi. I want to marry him, right? You done laid it down. You dropped your bars. You get married. The kuffar way is you smash, you get her pregnant, you marry her 5 years later, and then you meet her daddy. Muslims do it the Kafir way. Majority of the Muslims. So the longer we stay amongst them, the longer we're ignorant of Islam. See, sometimes when you're residing in Darul Kufr, like in Mecca, right? In Mecca, the Muslims, they were learning their deen and they avoided the kuffar. They avoided all paganistic practice. The first thing you abandon is their belief system, right? Then what happens when you abandon their belief system, you start abandoning their practices. Many of us don't abandon the practices. We abandon the belief with limitations. Because the stronger your belief get, the more it'll spill out in your limbs and in your heart. So anyway, so enough of that. So I gave those couple things as an example of kifaya, right? There's more, but I gave those couple examples of kifaya. So we covered this. Hold up, let me put this up here for you guys that are online, right? So here I'm highlighting it. So we covered this, okay? Oh man, sorry guys, highlighted. Okay, so we cover all this right here in the red for you guys who are online. This is what we just finished discussing. Now we're going to talk about the last category, and then after we're done with that, then we're done with the class. Okay? For today. Now. All right, so let's move over to this category here now. I'm going to change the color of the marker again. I'm going to give you purple. You know, I'm feeling purple right now. Feeling grapes. Anyway, so the madahid al-ulum. The madahid al-ulum. The madhab of the sciences. Okay? Now, as I mentioned earlier, I briefly touched on it. I'll mention it again. A madhab is a set of principles. No person that was attributed, the madhab was attributed to them, they were not, you know, saying, hey, follow me, I'm the most knowledgeable. It's something that Allah gave them. And one of the signs that a person has barakah is he's able to bring people together. right? The amount of people doesn't matter. They're able to bring people together. A person with no barakah, they run everybody away, right? That's one of the signs of barakah, okay? Now, in this we're talking about Aqidah and we're talking about fiqh, okay? Madhab in Aqidah, ilmu kalam, the kifaya, okay? You have the usuluddin. The usuluddin are those things those principles that are known, commonly known, as the Shaykh who mentioned in Umdatul Bayan. He said that all of these things are qat'i. They're explicitly, and they're known by kitabu wa sunnah wa ijma'. This is what he says. He'll say it again in this book as well, right? So with regards to belief, usuluddin is the foundation. It is what you're obligated to know individually. Ilmu kalam is the kifaya. Ilmu kalam is the aiki jujitsu of your belief. That is what you fight deviance with, right? Or clarify matters. I don't want to say fight in this time. People might take me literally. This is what you clarify deviant aqidah with, okay? Now, in that you have two madhabs, okay? You have the Ash'ari or the Ash'ari, and you have the Maturidi. Their principles is what governs the belief with regards to ilmu kalam. Where the confusion is coming in at, you have a third group who tried to poke their head in. That is the Salafiyah, which they basically base their aqidah based off of the principles and the beliefs of Ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. All right, that is where that comes from. You have arising within the Salafiyah, the other group called the Athariyah, which there is no imam to attribute it to. They attribute it to books, the imam, the authors of books like Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qarawani. You know, I believe they attribute it to Tahawi, which I don't understand how, because in his Muqaddimah, in his introduction, he says that he's on the millah to Abu Hanifa, Nu'man ibn Thabit, which is Abu Hanifa's actual name. Abu Hanifa is his kunya. Nu'man ibn Thabit, you know, Abu Yusuf, Muhammad al-Shaybani, he attributes it to that, and it was known that they were of their aqidah was under the umbrella of the Maturidi principles, right? So they attribute themselves to like Imam Malik, right? Ibn Abi Zayd, really along the line all of the Malikiyah, and some of them even attributed amongst the Hanbaliyah. Some people even say that the Hanbalis had their own madhab and understanding, and a lot of that is because they differed in certain points with the Ash'aris, you know, on certain issues. So therefore, the two were widely accepted. The latter that I mentioned, the Athariyah, the Salafiyah, you know, I don't even like to put the Salafiyah in the category of the Hanbaliyah, right? They make ascription of their beliefs to imams. There's some things that they believe that are identical to other imams, so they build their aqidah system based on that. Okay, so you'll find them agreeing with Malik in certain things, disagreeing with Malik in others. Like for instance, you know, they have a literal approach, and then also what we're going to also talk about within Ilmul Kalam, you have subcategories within Ilmul Kalam. We're gonna discuss it, and I didn't put it up there because it's actually in the text. So we're gonna talk about it in the text. You're gonna talk about the madhab of the Salaf and the madhab of the Khalaf, right? It's a complex discussion, but how most people are putting it, they put the Salaf as the correct one, and the Khalaf as the incorrect one, and this is not the case. All right. We have to put Islam back in its proper. We got to put it back together. Every student now, true students, right? I was just having a conversation with a brother yesterday, right? We was talking about masjids open. If the masjid is not going to have the proper hidayah, the proper guidance, we don't need another masjid, because we have plenty of mosques. We need masajid, not a mosque. Another mosque, an imamless masjid. If you ever notice, the imamless masjids are beautiful. They look good inside. That's all the money is at. And the smaller masjid, they're the ones that's kind of looking rough because most people don't attend them and they don't give any money towards it to fix it. right? That's the reality. We need hidayah. We need masjid, places where you can pray, right? The same thing. All of these different Sufi orders and all that stuff, if they are not implementing basic things, they are not Sufi, they're goofy Sufis. Basic things. A true Sufi, meaning a person on the path to soul for purification, they pray every prayer in the masjid, right? They pray every prayer in the masjid. They don't miss it. Because the path of the Sufiya, as the Shaykh who mentioned in Usul al-Wilaya, he said that, he quoted Junaid al-Baghdadi, he said all of the different turuqs, all of the different paths are closed except the path of Muhammadiyah, which brings you back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And your Shaykh, your teacher, his job is to take you out of the hands or the footprints of ignorance and put you in the footprints of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now what we live in is an era of labels. And if you're label matched, then that means that you're guided. But what good is a label if it doesn't have? It doesn't matter. If you had a Lexus, I ask you brothers here. If you had a Lexus, right? And Lexus is a top tier car. But that Lexus didn't have an engine. What good is that truck to you? What good is that Lexus to you? You can take pictures with it, right? You can post stuff for Instagram, leaning on it, standing on it like you on top of the world. You can do all that stuff, right? But the reality is, outside of the camera, that car don't move. And many of us are claiming Ashari, Maturidi, Qadri, Tijani, all of these different things are making claim, and you still the same old Negro you used to be before Islam. It doesn't change you. So we don't need no more mosques. We need places of hidayah, masjid. People need to pray where the hidayah is at. That's what happens. You make the ummah stronger by frequenting and understanding, by learning, understanding, teaching the spread, right? Just imagine. Because if that was the case, then they would have stayed in Mecca. They'd have just been like, yo, we got our thing going on. You got your thing going on. No, those people of disbelief wouldn't have it. And what makes you think America's going to be any different? The stronger you get in Islam, as a black man in America, and I ain't talking about strong in Islam like I just got strong faith. Because if you got strong faith, it's going to change some things about you. The prison industrial complex, it is a money maker. For every day you're in prison, they make money. I think in states like New Jersey now, they charge inmate money to live in jail as if you volunteer to be there. Right? Well, actually, you do a crime, right? But anyway, my case in point, the more men become Muslim and women, the more that and they practice Islam, you'll start to weaken a lot of systems that's set up. Child support be gone. Why would child support be gone? Because the Muslim man knows that he has to, take care of the children and things of that nature. So he will start doing so. He'll govern himself by Islam, right? Stop having blood tests. He ain't gonna need no blood tests. Why? Because you're no longer fornicating and committing adultery, right? He's knocked all of these things out. This is why this whole system is set up in order to preserve. The sciences are set up in order to preserve Islam, right? It doesn't make you cool if you're labeled with a label. I'm telling you, and most people, we're all just sitting on a Lexus with no engine. That's what we're doing. We're taking pictures for the gram. I got my thobe on. My beard is long. My pants legs is high. I look good. I can quote Arabic. That's that Lexus with no engine. But when I'm done, I still conduct myself the same way that the Kafirs conduct themselves, right? I'm still a misogynist. I got problem with women. I hate women. I don't look at them as Muslims. I look at them as hoes. Hoes and hijabs. What they call them? Hojabs. This is kufr, right? We start doing these type of things, right? You're not supposed to make mockery of the deen, but because of what? We don't popularize these things. This is where this comes from. So many people, you'll see them claim each one of these names of the sciences, but they're not a practitioner. Not a practitioner of it, right? How do you become a practitioner? By learning and applying what you're doing. So anyway, that's the madhahibs of Aqidah, Ilm al-Kalam. Now you'll argue with some, they'll be like, there's no such thing as a madhab in Aqidah, because they're not looking at it from that perspective. Another problem is, and I'll say one more thing on the lines of Aqidah, one of the biggest issues that we're having today is that you're learning Aqidah and believing that the particular book that you're studying for Aqidah is the absolute belief, and you forget to go back to the Quran. The Quran is the source of everything, and you no longer refer back to that. So therefore, you start making takfir and calling people kafirs based off of the words of Imam Tahawi, right? But no evidences or anything connected to it. You'll argue, well, Imam Tahawi says in his Aqidah, which is not a problem, right? But your argument is only based off of that theory. So if the Shaykh says in the section with regards to mu'amilat, a person that does practice, he says that you can't guide a person based off of the theory of a mujtahid. What about a person that's making inkar, objection to someone's belief that cannot explain what exactly he believes? What about that person? He can't explain what he believes. If you can't explain what you believe, then how will you be able to refute somebody with regards to belief? So now with the madhahibs of fiqh, you have 4. The science of Sharia is law, and we need to start approaching it as such, right? Abu Hanifa, Malik ibn Anas, Muhammad Idris al-Shafi, that's his name. Everybody knows him as Imam Shafi. Ahmed ibn Hanbal, he's also known as Imam Ahmed. Out of those 4, the first 2 are known within the first, the second and the third generation, right? Abu Hanifa, there's a little discussion about whether or not he was a tabi or a tabi, right? They said he was considered a tabi because his father took him to meet Ali ibn Abi Talib when he was a young boy, and Ali made dua for him. This is what is taught from amongst the Ahnaf. Imam Malik was a tabi because all of the people that he learned from were tabi, right? Senior tabi or senior tabi is what he learned from some of his contemporaries as well. In Imam Malik's chain, which I'm very familiar with, and most of us are, we can name in each generation in his chain from one of the 3 generations, right? You have from the Sahaba, the Silsila al-Dhahabiyya, the golden chain. Let me see Malikiism. What's the golden chain?
Nafi, Abdullah ibn Umar, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Let's go back. Start from Sahaba.
Sahaba would be Abdullah ibn Umar.
Okay, and who did Abdullah ibn Umar teach amongst the tabi? Nafi, and who Nafi taught?
Imam
Malik. You see that chain? Why now? If you put everything I explained, did it connect the dots? Why you need the salaf? If you don't have the salaf, that's your criteria. That's how you know where your knowledge comes from. All of these sciences come from them or somebody within those categories. It has a chain. It traces itself back. The statements or the principles that the imams of the different madhahibs that they utilize, their statements, their hadith, their narrative is going back to one of these 3 generations. It's not just like the person just went in the closet and came up with it and said, you know what? Yeah, this is it right here because of this. No. It traces back. It has a connection. That's why I called that chart as-sanidul ilm. Right? I'm sorry. It should have been as-sanid ulum. Right? Because as-sanid is plural. So that's a mistake on my behalf. Right? The plural, the chains of knowledge or the Islam, right? This is our connection. And within those categories of imams, there's subcategories of some of their students that reach top level. And some of their opinions differed with the founder of the madhab. Right? Because based off of evidences though. It differed with them. But their foundation is based off of that imam. So this is where it became a madhab, right? It's not about the personality. It's about the principles within there. And they use those principles in order to come to that point. Now, what's interesting is all of them had interaction with each other, right? Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, they kind of had nikash. They had some discussion amongst each other, right? They didn't agree with each other on everything. Muhammad Idris al-Shafi was a student of Imam Malik and also a student of Abu Hanifa by way of Abu Yusuf, right? Muhammad Idris al-Shafi was the teacher of Ahmed ibn Hanbal in fiqh. They're all intertwined one way or another. Right? They're all intertwined one way or another. Imam Shafi wrote a book on the principles of Malik's fiqh, which later became known as his Risala. And he says it in there. So each of them benefited from each other. People weren't just willy-nilly. Now what's happened today, because there's no general Khalifa and most people don't listen to their leaders, people study all over the place and people are bringing Aqidah from everywhere. Right? Now, our intent, as a Jamaat, our intent was to push out all of that stuff. That's why we established Masjid Uthman and Fodio. If we were going to establish another mosque, there was no need. We could have just prayed everywhere else. We would have pushed everything out. We were too constantly fighting. You're arguing with Salafiyah. You're arguing with Demon Sufiyah. Is Shia hiding amongst them? We don't have that here. You had to create an environment where you were safe, where you protected yourself, because that is what we're supposed to do. We create a safe environment, right? Not just a safe environment from dodging bullets, but also dodging Aqidah that isn't from Islam. So this is why these things were established. Other people, their history, they'll tell you why they came about. But with that, inshallah, we'll close out. Hopefully I gave, clarity to the sciences of the deen and removed a lot of the confusion, inshallah. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Inshallah, I'll post this lecture as well. It's recorded on YouTube, so it's public on my YouTube channel. But I will post this inside of the Google Classrooms group, and you'll have another assignment. Some of you guys complete the first assignment. Inshallah, make sure you get that first assignment done, and I'll post this with the new assignment, inshallah. And next week we'll go back to the actual text, because the point of what was important is I mentioned all this because we're going to be relying heavily on this stuff in this text. Right? We're going to be talking about this. You're going to hear, Ashari. You're going to hear Maturidi. You're going to hear Aqidah. You're going to hear the words fiqh. You're going to hear Madhab. You're going to hear Tabi. You're going to hear Salaf. You're going to hear these words. So it's best you have an understanding. And this is a little bit more, like I said before, I say it again, this class is a bit more advanced than Umdatul Bayan. All right. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.